She Means Business is a web series that we do monthly. And Olga and I have partnered on this together to really cover topics that pertain to women in the workplace. We really wanted to have this space where we can talk about anything and everything that concerns women, what we've seen as well in our own experiences, and what we see as now coaches, specifically working on careers, what we see with our clients as well, and what our clients are facing. And we really wanted to be a sounding board, and also to kind of bring light to these, and just kind of create a collaborative space and an open dialogue and discussion for some of these things that we all may be feeling, but that we maybe don't hear from other people. So with that, our topic today is really, we wanted to focus on boundaries, and really specifically setting boundaries at work. I know this is something I struggled with when Olga and I were talking. Olga as well struggled with this as well. We think it's quite a common problem with a lot of women in the workplace setting different boundaries. And so we said, this is so vital. And so we really wanted to focus on kind of how to set boundaries, how to keep them in place, and really looking at why they matter. So with that, I know I've talked a lot for this introduction. Olga, tell me, let's throw it over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. Glad to see the numbers are going up little by little. That's good. Welcome everyone. Exciting topic today, because we talk about boundaries, but very often what we noticed with Susan, our clients don't even feel that their boundaries are being pushed. But what they recognize first,
boundaries even.
Yes. And what they recognize first is being overworked, burnt out, fatigued, stressed out. And then when we start talking, we talk about boundaries, and people start thinking, that's what it is. So to start off with, I'd like those who joined, if you can type in your comments, which boundaries do you find difficult to keep, or which boundaries do you know others find difficult to keep? And while you're doing this, I just wanted to talk about a couple that Susan and I brainstormed, and we believe we find them a lot in ourselves and in our clients. So at work, most of the time, obviously, it's a time boundary, right? We come in for 8 hours and we end up working 9 or 10, because time runs away, and we don't know how to set boundaries for our time. We also talk about workload. Why is our time eaten up? It's about sometimes us getting too much of the workload, but then comes the boundary. How do we keep our boundaries not accepting work, or how do we delegate work so it's a boundary with yourself? There are physical boundaries. We all work from home at the moment. Oh, we used to. We're coming back to the offices. So we all, how do we keep physical boundaries when we work at home? If we have children, for example, how do we tell them, this is it, mama is working, you can't come in? How do we establish that physical space? Same in the office. If you're concentrating and people are constantly asking you or throwing jokes around and so on in the open space office. Hello to everyone who is listening from there. And also because our computers, when we come to work, our computers are set up for all the notifications to pop onto your screen all the time. And then our need to be digitally present all the time, even if we don't have notifications, answering the emails and so on. And one which is very often neglected and overlooked is work inside us, and how do we allow or not allow it to sit there and eat us from inside if we have some issues. And I know we will be talking more about it today as well. So those are the types of boundaries that we find very often our clients have issues with keeping, and very often they don't even know what they are. What's your common sort of usual suspect, Susan?
I'm always the person, that is really struggling to say no. I know, in the past, if
Me
a
too.
manager came to me, they would instantly say, "Hey, can you get this done?" And even with really short, unreasonable deadlines, "Hey, can you have this to me by tomorrow morning?" And I would say, "Yeah, absolutely. Of course I can do this. Never mind if I'm
Because you're a
absolutely
good
swamped."
girl.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be seen as someone that everyone in the office could count on. And the problem with this is I was overextending myself. I was doing way too much, um, to the point where I was cracking. I was breaking down to the point where I pretty much burnt out from all of my previous jobs because I did not set healthy boundaries. And it really had a lot to do with saying no. And when I didn't say no, then it cuts into time, working overtime, putting in more work to do all of these things that I committed to just because I didn't simply set healthy boundaries. I know this is one that you also, Olga, have struggled with, but I think that you have another one that you also really, really struggled with, far as kind of setting boundaries.
Yeah. Uh, I I struggle a lot with saying no, but I also struggle a lot with the emotional boundaries. I'm the kind of person who allows everything in. But then what do I do with this everything in when I come back home, for example, and I need to address my family and so on. But I bring so much emotional baggage back from work. And the one in particular, I used to work on large transformation programs, and you are sworn in into secrecy, and you are one of those few people who know this many people are going to be made redundant, and then you have to come to work knowing that these people are going to be let go.
This
You
is,
can't
yes.
tell them. You can't tell them, and you work on this program which is gonna let them go. And because I do communications, so literally you can frame it in, I'm going to be the one writing that they're going to be gone, and that's a huge emotional toll on you if that's the way you look at it. So one of the ways I found was helpful for me is to reframe, and every morning I would wake up and say, I'm going to work. We're going to let people go, but I'm going to be the one who is going to make this process as humane as possible, because that's what my job is. So I was trying to sort of not to take this pain back home, because it was easy from inside, and it was impossible to come back home and worry about it rather than be present for my family.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the things is that as we see, with ourselves, with our clients, if you don't set these boundaries in place, something at some moment has got to give. You're going to bring it home to your family. They're going to feel the stress and the pressure of it. You are going to start breaking down as well, if physically, emotionally, um, that it takes its toll. And really, I think that's the big thing about boundaries is upholding them, because I know setting it can be one thing. Sometimes people I've had clients that told me, but I have tried to set boundaries and it just doesn't work out. Um, and it really seems like oftentimes it's you that kind of gives way with your boundaries. So it's, you don't want to appear like you're being lazy. So you say, no, no, like I just got to hustle. I've got to take one for the team. I've got to pull my weight and, say yes to doing this, or, it's just this little thing. Also, I know that a lot of clients have told me this real fear of being judged. What would my manager say if I said no? What would my manager think if I acted like this? Um, and I think it's this fear of how you're going to be perceived. Are you going
Mhm.
to still be liked? Are you now all of a sudden going to be disliked or hated in your team because of the boundaries that you set? Um, Also, I think with, like you talked about similar before, being remote, I think it's great. There's a lot of benefits to working remote, but sometimes it's harder to disconnect because your house is your workplace as well. And it's harder to, you're not leaving and having that physical cut because you're still in your work environment. So sometimes it's easier to overwork. Um, and then especially upholding boundaries, we find for women especially, the expectations can often be more. If there's a project, women are often sometimes subconsciously look to set things up. It's just a natural thought process. Oh, well, this person would probably volunteer for this. And it's this assumption that women will be the ones that are accommodating new projects or volunteering for something, or often being expected to contribute in some way or another. And so, with those expectations, it's harder as a woman, I think, to kind of set your boundaries and be firm on them.
Yeah, and then, but that is a double-edged sword, isn't it, Susan? It's the expectations from women, but also women giving in to this expectation, and yeah, and it's difficult. And I think it's a lot. We hold a lot of power, not to give in. But I think the important thing is to start noticing where your boundaries are being pushed, because I think once you notice, then it's easier to work with it.
Knowledge is power. I mean,
Yeah.
I definitely didn't have all this terminology. I think for years, nobody had these terminologies. We're seeing it a lot in the mental health and like psychology space, where a lot of people are talking about setting boundaries with toxic family members. We're seeing a lot of people talk about boundaries with kind of within their personal lives. But I think it's equally as important to talk about it in a workspace, especially because women are pushing themselves too hard and too far, and they often don't feel valued or respected as well. And they often, on top of feeling all of this overwhelm for everything that they're doing. So I think that's why it's really important to look at what are boundaries. These are setting clear, set walls, if you will, of what your hard line is. This I cannot do. And being self assured and confident in saying, no, this is the line that you cannot cross.
And I just add, and on top of this is what you agree with yourself, and then
Of what your line is.
it's communicating and making sure everyone around you clearly knows what those boundaries are and what your expectation is.
But it's
Because
exactly like you said, Olga, like first, knowledge is power. It's first understanding, and then understanding where your limits are at and where you set your line. So being understanding yourself and then being consistent, and then sharing that with people within your life, where, and this can be applied, we're talking from a work perspective, but this can be applied to any facet of your life essentially.
and which is important, speaking about different facets of our lives, we can't be one person at work and one person at home.
Yeah.
If we have an issue with setting boundaries, like I was giving an example of struggling with setting emotional boundaries, I was doing exactly the same. I was bringing my emotional issues that I had in family back into the office and not being able to concentrate, right? So it's once we identify a boundary to work on, we need to make sure we work in both places, because it's sort of one and the same muscle that we're training.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Olga, where to start with this? We talked a bit about first identifying, but how do you, yeah, let's give something concrete for people that we've noticed with ourselves that we try to practice. We're not perfect, by the way. We have to, this is something we still ongoingly work on as well. We want to be transparent about that. But yeah, also what we work with clients.
Yeah, I'll start with, yes, I'm Olga and I'm not perfect. There's a lot of boundaries I need to work on.
Yeah.
And I continuously do. But it's sort of the way I start, and the way I start with any client is, and I find it very powerful, I ask the client for 2 weeks to observe themselves. to observe, like imagine you have a little CCTV on your shoulder, and you walk through the day and you notice, for example, we identified saying no as a problem, or keeping physical boundaries as a problem. So I usually ask the client, then let's stick with saying no. I ask the client, going through the day, notice what is happening. Notice when there was an opportunity you could have said no, you didn't, and there was an opportunity when you could say no and you did. And then how did it, what was preceding this situation? How did it feel when you chose to say no or not to say no? And just collect it, no judgment, just collect this, because data is power. And then in the end of the day and then the end of the week, look at patterns. And this is going to inform you what's going on with you not being able to set boundaries. Maybe you'll discover that it's just you not being able to say no, or you're not able to say no when you're stressed out. You're not able to say no. And I liked Julia's comment here that sometimes environment provokes you for this. So
yeah, absolutely.
maybe you can't say no in a boardroom, but you are okay saying no at the water cooler. Collect all of this information. It's extremely important. And then look at the patterns, and then start practicing small. The sandbox, that's my favorite advice. Get the sandbox and practice saying no, just in a little situation. Even as we talked during one of our first lives, for example, if you can't say no and the food that was brought into you in the restaurant is not to your standards, try to send it back once. See how it works. So, because as I said, it's a muscle. And then try small in the work environment, and then go big. Don't try to say no to the CEO right away, because that might cost you burnout and maybe a job. Practice.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing. It's like once you build this muscle, you can work your way up to saying no to the CEO. But it's that you develop, in addition to working this muscle, you develop the finesse to be able to present it in the way that you need to when setting boundaries with certain people.
Absolutely. And shall we give a couple of stories, because people always ask us about our client stories?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What's your favorite one, or a good example?
So I would have to say one of my clients that I've heard something similar, is that people are constantly overwhelmed with notifications these days. And for this particular client I'm thinking of, Slack was very detrimental to her work, because she felt like every time she would get into the rhythm, the flow of getting things done, there'd be a ping on Slack. And so she would jump to respond, because she didn't want people to think that she wasn't attentive to their needs. Also, especially if she worked from home, she was worried, what if people think I'm slacking off? I need to prove that I'm working hard. So each time she was interrupted by Slack, responded to whatever that person's needs were, she found it extremely hard to come back to what she was doing, because she's been thrown off. So to get back into that flow of this work pattern that she was doing before, it would be an uphill battle. And so she felt like it was taking way longer to do tasks, but she told me, I just can't stop responding to Slack. What if people think I'm not working hard? What if people think that, I'm not a good colleague because I'm not helping them on something? And so it was really, really difficult for her. So we really talked about kind of what all these fears were. What is the fear behind, okay, they don't think that you're working hard enough, or they don't think that you're a good colleague. And then we started brainstorming solutions that could work for her. So we kind of talked through some of these things, like maybe set some kind of status to say that you're in focus mode. Maybe to turn off notifications when you set the status, so people know you're not ignoring them on purpose. Maybe put some kind of note. or explicitly just telling colleagues, like I even suggested you could send out a mass email to colleagues and just say, hey, I'm often distracted from deep work by pings on Slack. I just wanted to let you know that I will put a note and turn off notifications, but I will get back to you within a few hours of your message, just so that people really understood that if it was something important, maybe they need to call her because she's not actively going to be checking Slack.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the things, because setting these boundaries is important, because for her, she wasn't getting the type of work that she needed to get done because of these constant interruptions. But she felt like she had no choice, when really she had a choice. She just needed to set and really explain her boundaries to all the parties that are involved.
Do you know what? You just reminded me of a small case I had with a client, very similar to yours, with everyone was pinging her and she had trouble concentrating and delivering on the bigger tasks. And that's where the sandbox came in, because we brainstormed, why and a lot of pings were about information that she's not the one to ask for it, but she is the one who would definitely find an answer, because she's a good girl and she knows how to find information. So we then looked at it, and she realized that why are they all coming to her? Well, they're coming to her because she's the fastest to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was like, oh gosh, what do I do? And we said, what if we play in a little sandbox? What if the ping comes and you answer in an hour? You just said, this is a game. Set yourself kind of this game. And then she came back to me 2 weeks later and she said, look, it's not just an hour. I'm now doing half a day of not answering. And, the organization is not burned down. And then many times I find that people found the answers by asking the appropriate people. So it was about building her own courage to keep her boundaries.
Because other people, yeah, exactly. But because, just like you said, she was the one responding the fastest, so people reach out to her. But that's because other people have already set boundaries with messages that come in.
Yes.
And so then she becomes the go-to, and she wants to be helpful, because it goes back to us wanting to be the good girl, us wanting to be the nice girl in the office, wanting to do what we think is right. But in the end, it's throwing us off.
Totally. And it's amazing how many times it's about making a deal with yourself about setting your own boundaries, because we think it's others who who intrude onto our boundaries, which is actually a good segue to the story that I wanted to share. I had this client, a senior manager, who came to me and she said that I'm burnt out, I'm overworked, I need your help with setting boundaries everywhere, at work, in the family. I just don't feel I have my own life at the moment. So we talked, brainstormed, she had the observation, and she realized that she is not setting boundaries, that she becomes very stressed out. When she becomes very stressed out, she goes into the control mode, and the control mode means she does everything, which then doesn't give her any free time. Like at work, she doesn't delegate. And so we were thinking with her, well, how do we start practicing so that she's not scared for big stuff? Like, how do we do small stuff? And she said, I'm going to try at home. Okay, try at home, safer environment. You're not going to be fired at home. So she asked her husband to help her get their daughter ready for school in the morning, so that she has more headspace to get ready for work. She's taking her to school, but and she simply asked, and the husband said, yeah, okay. So she came to my session and she says, could I do this? Like, why didn't you tell this before? She was shocked herself how easy it was to communicate what was needed to clean up her space, not to be overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and empowered by that, she went back to the office, and every time she felt, okay, this, the stress is coming up, is building up, because that's what she identified in her observations. She's like, oh, this is it. This is going to eat me now, and I'm going to start doing everything. No, deep breath, and then she asks her team, to take over this task or that task, or even stops herself from taking those tasks from them.
Yeah. So
And
she's really learned to delegate, and then she's learned to say, no, I don't take on extra tasks. This needs to be for someone else.
exactly, because her go-to mode is, I'm stressed out, I'm going to take everything and do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what she discovered about herself. And I think discovering how you react to boundaries being pushed is key, because there's no one pill that we can, as coaches, that we can give to everyone that, here's your boundaries pill, here's your time management pill. We are all so different, and sort of coping with boundaries or setting boundaries is a different technique for everyone.
No, it's finding what works for you and implementing it.
Yeah, which
Um,
is tough. Implementing is tough.
yeah. What would you say? Because I think that even like when you implement, I think the thing is, it's keeping it implemented and kind of maintaining them that's hard. And I think there's two ways, because we said before, if you feel like you're not sure about your own boundaries and you haven't really set it in your head to maintain them, this can be difficult. But also another thing of being difficult to maintain them and kind of implement and maintain is that others around you, if they're simply just ignoring your boundaries or even trying to push past your boundaries. I know I sometimes have clients that say this when I'm saying, well, set boundaries at work with your colleagues or your manager. And people already like to ask, but what if they don't listen? What if they don't? What if they don't accept that I say no, or that I don't do this? And I say, you have to see. First, you see, and then you see, okay, like, what do I do if my boundaries are being tested and ignored? And so,
Yeah.
how do you usually coach people on this, Olga, when someone comes to you and they say, like, well, my manager isn't listening?
I usually start with, they are also people. And the fact that you think they're not listening is not the fact. It's how you see them. And that's really important, sort of to stop judging them. And then when you know that that's your boundary, or when you know your peers or your boss is pushing them, the first step is, it's important to let them know what they're doing. They sometimes might not even realize that they're pushing your boundaries. And I usually teach sort of a 3-step phase. Once we get there, once we know, we need to talk to the boss, because if you come to them and say, stop doing this,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not going to work. So we use a phrase that psychologists often use, is 3 phases. You say, I noticed this is happening.
Mm.
And you try to stay as non-judgmental as possible. You don't say, I noticed you scold me a lot. That's judgmental. You say, I noticed tasks are not being done, and I noticed you being upset at certain moments.
Mm.
And then you go into how this makes you feel. For example, I see that I see this, I feel very stressed out. So I noticed this is how it makes me feel. And then I'd like to ask you to do the following, right? And then you say, going forward, I'd like for us to be able to have a conversation about it.
Mm.
Or in the boundaries, you can say, I noticed you you constantly constantly is the wrong word. Scratch that.
We were learning. This is perfect because this is
Yeah,
exactly like you have to realize that words have
it's
meaning.
so difficult to stay non-judgmental. It's so you say, I noticed you send a lot of urgent tasks to me on a Friday afternoon.
Mhm.
I wanted to let you know that I feel very anxious going into the weekend because I think they're urgent and they need to be done. Going forward, could I ask you to set the when you send me the tasks, to set the deadline, or to be clear about the deadlines?
Mm.
I have to tell you, so many times we've done this with my clients, and then they would come back to me and they say, "Oh, and my boss said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this has such an effect on you."
Okay. Because there are people and humans too, and of course they just didn't realize.
They Because it was their free time. There were no meetings on Friday, so they were catching up with all the emails, just shooting them off. It works for them.
Yeah.
It's not that they're villains and they're waking up in the morning and think, how am I going to pressure the person who works for me? So having this conversation as a starter is really important, and the most important thing to stay as non-judgmental as possible, and
Yeah.
to share how this makes you feel when you get it. Yeah. What do you How do you work with clients on setting boundaries?
Um, it's definitely reasserting. I find that sometimes the people around you who you've stated your boundaries with, it's not that they're ignoring them, they've just simply forgotten that you've set this as a boundary.
Mhm.
So it's reassessing, like, hey, um, I don't know if you remember, but I told you that I'm extremely overwhelmed these days. Um, as much as I would love to help you, I cannot at this time. Please respect my time in this moment, um, and with what you went in terms of what you asked for.
Mhm.
Because sometimes I had a client that was really, again, one of the office go-to people that was constantly being asked for everything, and they just got to the point they felt overwhelmed just by someone asking and them having to say
Yes.
no each time. So they just said, please don't ask me. And we even set a date, like, please don't ask me for anything until after this date, unless it's urgent and it pertains specifically to my role. Um, and she had to keep reminding people because people would forget, and she would have to
Yeah.
remind people um, that, I mentioned this. I'm not available to even look or think about something before this date. So I think it has a lot to do with reasserting, telling people over and over again. Um, and sometimes people as well who don't necessarily want to accept your boundary, because a boundary may make it their life more difficult. It's easier to just rely on you rather than sometimes respecting your boundary. So people will push sometimes, and you
Mhm.
just have to keep setting the boundary, and reasserting that's the boundary, and you're not going to budge on it.
Yeah, and another thing to remember, and we work with this, especially working with senior stakeholders, because, well, let's admit, we need to learn who they are and what language they understand better.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's helpful to look into, especially if my clients work in large companies, they do all sorts of personality assessments, and they're helpful. Sometimes you read them and then you forget about them and they're dusted somewhere in the drawer. But it's important to understand how you communicate and what's important for you, and how others communicate and what's important for them. And if it's DISC, for example, that people use a lot, it's if you're analytical and someone there is more relationship and emotional, you saying 20 2 hours, it doesn't work for people. They need to have an emotional cue, sort of to
Yeah,
understand.
exactly. Because they just aren't they don't communicate and understand in that way.
Yeah, so it's important. I know it's hard because there are so many steps to build the boundaries, but it's one of the one of the elements to keep in mind. How do we tell people who are different to us and who speak different languages at work, especially if we communicate with bosses? I work quite a lot with senior leaders, like director, vice president level. That's when this whole sort of stakeholder awareness kicks in. You really need to be aware how you do this, because it's important. So I would say, if I were to give advice, to take out those reports and try to see, when you're trying to set boundaries with someone, what type of language they understand better.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's not to say that this is easy. We know it's not easy to implement and also to hold in place, especially when they're being tested. Um, so I don't feel like I can't do it or I don't really understand how. A lot of people work with someone on this. For example, we're telling you about our clients. Our clients have worked with us on this. Olga and I have worked with coaches on our own boundaries as well. That's why it's important, if you still feel like you're struggling with this, to reach out and get support with this, whether it be from us or another coach or someone else that you find as a mentor.
You would laugh. The first time I worked with a coach was 14 years ago, and 13 years ago. And the biggest thing we worked on was me being able to say no.
Mm.
It
Not
was,
surprised
oh,
at all, because knowing your character, I'm sure this was the number one thing.
it was tough. And my issue was, I like to run like at 100 miles per hour. So I was not even noticing when I was not saying no. So we worked on slowing down and noticing when to say no, so that I was keeping my boundaries. And it works, because you have an accountability partner. You have a plan. You go and do it, because when you do it all on yourself, you kind of, you cut yourself some slack, and you have finished your sentences in your head, and you're not entirely honest with yourself. But when you need to talk to someone, and to talk them through what's happening, what's not happening, a lot is happening inside you. You know, you're understanding. So
For me, it was always, but how do I do it? And I needed someone to actually help me craft that language to set my boundaries. And once I kind of had an outline, I then was able to tweak it to make it sound more like me and feel more authentic. But I needed someone to, yeah, just to kind of walk me through something that I could say, because I didn't even know how
yeah.
to go about that.
Yeah, in my case, as we discovered with my coach, I needed to be able to slow down to even notice that my boundaries are being pushed. So
Yeah.
I felt bad, sort of overwhelmed and everything, but I didn't realize it was because I was not keeping my boundaries. And then the next step was like noticing your boundaries, and only then doing something about it. And I think if my coach didn't give me all the practices to slow down, I wouldn't have been able to work on my boundaries, because I would still be missing them, like this, like lampposts on the train.
Yeah.
You don't see them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's just so much that you get from setting healthy boundaries, because like I mentioned, I burnt out from all of my previous careers just simply because it took me in my work, because it took me way too long to learn how to say no. It took me way too long to learn how to set healthy boundaries, to explain that this doesn't work for me. Um, and I think the thing is that comes out of it is your overall personal well-being when you set boundaries, career
Oh,
longevity. You have healthier relationships both in and inside of work and outside of work, because you've set those healthy boundaries. You can focus better. You're more productive. I think that all around, there's just tons of positives that go with setting and reinforcing boundaries.
Yes, that's a very nice wrap up, Susan. Because yeah, we started with how we feel burnt out and overwhelmed and don't know what it is. We talked about the boundaries, but then as a result, we just feel better about ourselves and live a better life, not being overwhelmed and overly consumed by what we need to do, but also by the struggle.
Yeah.
That we need to do so much. Yeah.
Is there something that you wish you could tell yourself before you started setting boundaries? That version of yourself?
That's a beautiful question. I would probably, I would probably say try to slow down, because I was running and being overwhelmed all the time. So no. Try to slow down. It wouldn't have worked for me running.
You would have been like, whatever.
Yeah, I would say slowing down sometimes is good. Sort of not to scare myself, but what would you say to your past self?
Boundaries aren't selfish.
Beautiful.
I used to think that setting boundaries was a very selfish thing to do. And now I don't know why, because it's, if anything, it's respecting myself. And it's knowing what I can and can't support. And I end up being a better version of myself for people when my boundaries aren't being crossed, because I'm a happier, healthier person. And so, yeah, boundaries are not selfish.
That is beautiful. I'm going to frame this and put it on the wall. I like this phrase.
I love, like, I always tell people, the older I get, the wiser I get. I'm just like, oh man, it's just, if only I knew half the things I know now. But life is a journey and it's a learning experience.
We are so writing a blog with this title, Susan.
Boundaries aren't selfish. Implement them. And I hope, anyone that struggles with this as well and maybe thinks the same, to really assess why you think that, because really for years I thought that, and I'm just so happy that I worked with a series of coaches and obviously not just on this one thing, but worked with a series of coaches and psychologists to really understand my thought process and how it wasn't serving me at all, and really reframing my mindset into something that is that's best for me and the people in my life.
You just provoked a thought, another thought in me. I rewound all the times I worked with coaches and psychologists, and I realized almost every time you do work with boundaries.
Mm-hmm. It's a reoccurring thing, but because I think it's really, that's how you manage and maintain great mental health, is by practicing boundaries.
Because it's like a rubber band. You practice and you're better, and then you get tired and then it's pulled back again.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope everyone that we've kind of inspired you just to think a bit differently about boundaries. Also, if you're feeling pushed on the brink of burnout, that you start realizing you can set boundaries, you can enforce them in your life and benefit from it as well. And if you're struggling, obviously there's a multitude of coaches and ourselves that are here to help.
Yes, and it's not selfish to work on this.
Yeah,
I love that. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, thank you as always, Olga, and to everyone there and watching, listening. And we will see you next month again for another episode. And thank you all for joining us. And we wish you a wonderful rest of your day and week.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.